what happens is, and how it works is, the brain contains these networks of brain cells, and they're called neurons. And these neurons communicate with each other along these pathways in our brains. Hi, I'm Tom Soul, and you are listening to the Social Seed Podcast. And right off the bat, you need to pat yourself on the back for listening to something good on social media that will help you. And if you really pat yourself on the back, it actually feels kind of rewarding. And that's what we want to do with self-development, is reward ourselves. And to get into today's topic on neuroplasticity, fire and wire your brain. And we're going to start off with a quote from Paul Nussbaum. Quote, "When you expose your brain to an environment that's novel and complex or new and difficult, the brain literally reacts." End quote. And this reaction is neuroplasticity. And today, we're going to be talking about what neuroplasticity is, how it works, a comparison of learning with creating a new path, and ways to improve your neuroplasticity. And we're going to start off with the definition of what neuroplasticity is. It is the ability of the nervous system to change its activity in response to intrinsic and extrinsic stimuli by reorganizing its structure, functions, and connections. So what does that mean? What is intrinsic? Intrinsic is the feeling that you have inside. It's when you feel good about completing a task, when you have motivation to do something, you rewire the connections in your brain, the sensories that go from completing that job to your brain, whichever part of the brain it connects to, that makes you feel good and makes you want to do it again. Extrinsic is like your environment, when someone pats you on the back, or you get a reward, or you get money, or something that's in your environment that's outside of your being. And what it does is when you have intrinsic and extrinsic stimuli, you form connections between your thoughts and sections of your brain. And your brain has so many different areas, which I'm not a person who knows completely about the whole brain, but we have different parts of our brain which perform different functions. And so we have when we hear things, it goes to a part that's a sensory for hearing in our brain. When we see things, it goes to like the occipital lobe in the back. When we touch things, all these sections are in our brain. So when you do these things, like little sections of your brain light up because you're using that section. And that's what forms like memories, because what it does is it kind of trickles down all those little sections of your brain. When you touch something, burn your hand, and you have a memory of it, those sensories trickle down to what's like your main CPU in your brain, which is your hippocampus. And the hippocampus retains like the memory, and it helps you with language. And that's what we want to do. Neuroplasticity is just making the connections in your brain go down to your hippocampus and to remember things so that you can learn, so you can remember next time, so you can evaluate things. And what happens is, and how it works is, the brain contains these networks of brain cells, and they're called neurons. And these neurons communicate with each other along these pathways in our brains. That's how, you can think something, and then it kind of be like, go all the way down to your hand, and your hand moves. Like, there's a pathway that goes all the way down to it. Like, when something's going to be hot, you can be like, ooh, lift your hand. Like, how did that happen? That's happened because many times when you were a little kid, you probably burnt your hand. So now, don't touch fire. Don't touch hot pans. You know not to do that. And those pathways are really strengthened, right? So what happens when we learn something new? That pathway is not very strong. So how do we make it strong? By keep studying, by keep learning, by keep experiencing. And by doing that, you strengthen that pathway. So what I'm going to do is compare learning to creating a new path. And when you think about a new path in the woods, if you've ever walked in the woods where there's not been a path, when you're just a little bit adventurous and you're like, I'm just going to forge my own way. And you know the general direction you want to go in. So like learning, you want to study something, and you're like, but I don't really know the path, and there is no path this way, but I'm just going to start making a path. And at first there are no footprints that mark the path. There's no branches snapped, and there's no, on the ground where the path just kind of like makes its way. And that's like learning. You're just going in for the first time and you're unsure about what you're actually going to learn. But the more you stick with it, say you walk the path again the next day, well, you might kind of know the way, and you see a couple footprints where you went, and maybe some branches that you've had to start, some grass or something you had to step on, and you kind of see it. And that's the same thing when you start learning, is you kind of pick up a little bit of here and there, and you start to figure it out. And then say like a month later, you've been walking down this path for so long, well, you can start to actually see where you've been walking, and you start to notice things around you, like different trees or different birds that are tweeting or animals that are around there, squirrels jumping. And, you start to make your way to where you're going to pretty easy. And then the next time you go down, or you say you go down like 20 more times, you start to really notice things like different styles of trees. And maybe you sit there and you kind of look for a while and you try to understand things. And the more you walk on this path, the more you see, the more you understand, and the more comfortable it becomes. And it almost becomes like, it's almost like forming a new habit. It just becomes something that you might actually take for granted, because if you walk along so many times, you just forget that you even used to find interest in it, because you've done it so many times. But you still see and listen and hear things, but they just kind of become numb to you. And that's kind of like when you walk down it a long time, sort of like your hand being burnt, without even like a thought of it, not a conscious thought of it, that you can't touch that. And that's what happens if you stick with learning anything new, that your brain is going to exhibit neuroplasticity. It's going to go through those stages and it's going to grow. And how this happens is you're going to create more connections between different areas of your brain. You're going to be able to think through it over and over again. And that's another thing. While you're sleeping, your brain is actually going through those same functions, your same thoughts of how things work. So getting a good night's sleep is actually super important when you're studying. Go ahead and study. If you haven't totally figured it out, get a good night's sleep. Let those thoughts, they'll keep working in your mind overnight. And that's why in the morning sometimes you figure it out. It just comes to you and you're like, I couldn't, like last night for the life of me, I sat up for like 2-3 hours and I could not figure it out. And this morning, eating breakfast, drinking my coffee, the answer just popped into my mind. And that's why your brain, your hippocampus, is still working at night, even when you're sleeping. And sleeping's very important. So, like I said before at the beginning, this all happens because of neurons and connections and pathways that are inside your body and your nervous system. And so it makes sense to find ways to make these connections stronger, to make more connections, and to make deeper connections. And so how do we do all that stuff? And when we're younger, we're kind of lucky, like younger being like 0 to 18 years of age. You just make neurons like going everywhere. They're just growing. And that's why young people can pick up things so quickly. And as we get older, our hippocampus and the amount of neurons that we make inside our brain doesn't work the same. They don't produce so many millions and billions, all the time. And those are definitely not exact numbers. But there are a ton when you're younger, and there are not a ton when you get older. But there are ways to increase the neurons in your brain. And that comes by, I think the number one is by exercise. Exercise is going to increase the neurons, the neurogenesis that's inside your hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and language. And as we get older, I know like I forget things, people's names, but I've tried really hard to remember the name by connecting it with some thought in my mind, or just the name of some objects. And that comes from like pruning, because if you don't see them or use those words all the time, your brain will sort of like a defragment. It'll clean up space for things that you don't use, but it's in there. If you can make a connection to what it is you're trying to think of and think about it for a little while, you'll probably figure it out, because it's in your brain. You just got to make the connection and find that connection that you used to use that reminded you of the word. But I just got off on a little bit of a tangent there to get back. But exercise. Yeah, let's see where I was. Yeah, it's producing new neurons. And it's probably the fastest way that you're going to produce more neurons. And another way, which is really cool, and I didn't even know it, it's just playing an instrument. Why is this? Well, think about it. You're using your left hand, like say you're playing a guitar. I'm using my left hand for the neck. I'm using my right hand to strum, because I'm right-handed. And I'm using my mind, I'm using my eyes, I'm using my ears, and I'm using my hands. All these sensory organs inside or on my body, inside my brain, are being used to try to create music that people want to hear. And it's not even music that people want to hear. It's intrinsic too, because it's music that satisfies me. It's like what I'm trying to say with my music, how I feel the beat going, how I feel the rhythm going, and how hard I want to strum, how soft I want to strum, when I want to stop, when I want to go. And all these different actions are coordinating, which is the white matter in our brain, which makes all the other functions connect to each other and talk to each other, communicate with each other. And so you're increasing that. So how cool is that? If you're playing an instrument, you're learning an instrument, doesn't matter if you stink or not, you might eventually become good, but it doesn't matter if you're not good at it or not. Just the act of trying will start to activate those different sections of your brain and make them kind of communicate with each other, which will help you in other things. So playing an instrument is really awesome. Another one is learning a new language. And that is a crazy hard skill. At least it is for me. I'm learning Spanish off Duolingo. I do the free version, and I suggest that if you want to learn a new language and do Duolingo and learn that language that you've always wanted to learn. Like, there is so much coordination going on in your mind when you're learning a new language, because you got to connect them, connect that word to what it means. And the word that's coming up in my mind right now is dormir, which is sleep in Spanish. I don't know why, because I'm not sleepy. I just helped a person on a boat because they had no engine and they couldn't get off and they were older and they needed help. And I ended up meeting a new person. Well, not new. I met him in Curacao. His name is Blake. And I remembered it because I made the connection before. I couldn't remember who they were, but now I remember, like I said, Blake Lively, because his girlfriend or wife was like a really outgoing person. So that's how I remembered them before. I just didn't connect the face, but now I had the face to the name again because it's been 7 months. But yeah, that's neuroplasticity, right? I made a connection when I first met them to connect Blake with Lively, to remember that they were a couple. I know who they are, where I made the connection. And so that's just another way of neuroplasticity. It's kind of cool how the brain works. Like, I don't know why it works like that, but it does. And the more we can make these connections and do the, playing an instrument, learning a language, and exercise, then we increase the neurons inside our hippocampus, which is responsible for that memory, responsible for language. And then there's other sections of brain. It's like motor functions and everything. You connect all those and your brain just becomes like super powerful. And it's pretty cool. And learning about neuroplasticity and understanding how connections work and how you can increase these connections to strengthen these pathways so that you remember things and so that you make more connections, so that you use different parts of your brain. It's pretty awesome. And I would say, don't just stop here, because I'm just an inspirationalist. I'm just trying to get you involved and really capitalizing, if you're a youth, on the neuroplasticity that's happening inside your brain every day that will eventually slow down. So if you're young, use your brain, start thinking, work on yourself, and really tune in to your mind and fully appreciate just where you are in life. And if you're older and you want to increase your neurons because you feel like you might be forgetting more than you used to, or you're not as quick as you used to because all those different sections of your brain aren't working together, you don't have the blood flowing in there that's increasing the neurogenesis inside your hippocampus, maybe start doing a little bit of exercise. Playing an instrument, I think makes everyone happy. Maybe not everyone happy around you because they got to listen to you a little bit, but eventually they will appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to end this episode, but not without saying the quote from Paul Nussbaum again. And here we go. Quote, "When you expose your brain to an environment that's novel and complex or new and difficult, the brain literally reacts." And if you got value from today's episode, make sure you hit the like button. If you don't want to miss future episodes, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you want to, leave a comment down below. And other than that, you can find me on Facebook at the Social Seed Podcast, or you can find me at thesocialseedpodcast.com and learn more about neuroplasticity. Start exercising, playing an instrument, or learn a language so you can increase your neuroplasticity and all those different areas, to connect all the different areas in your brain, make you sharp as a tack. All right?